You ever wonder what it takes to make a woman in designer heels scream for help, chest deep in cow manure? As I didn't. Not until the morning I watched the president of our HOA sink into a trench I legally dug, on my land, to stop her from trespassing for the 100th time. She said it was just a shortcut. But shortcuts cost you something. Respect, boundaries, sometimes even your dignity. And Karen, she lost all three the day her luxury SUV nosedived into my pasture like it was competing in a mud run. But hold on, this story ain't about revenge, not really. It's about the line you draw when the system won't protect you. The trench you dig when being polite just gets you run over. And how one stubborn old vet with a tractor can accidentally start a neighborhood revolution. So grab your coffee, or your whiskey, because by the time this story ends you'll understand. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. The road wasn't just dirt, it was dignity. They say dirt is just dirt, but anyone who's ever worked their own land knows better. That road, the one cutting through my front pasture, wasn't just gravel and clay, it was mine. Every bump, every pothole, every muddy stretch after a storm, I'd driven it 1,000 times, hauled hay down it, fed my goats along it, repaired it when the rains tried to wash it out. It wasn't on any HOA map, it wasn't part of some shared community lane, it was legally, fully, soulfully mine. And that mattered, more than I realized, until she started using it like it was hers. Every morning, same white SUV, same cloud of dust, same refusal to slow down or even pretend she noticed the big red sign that said, Pilmit Road, no trespassing. At first, I let it slide, thought maybe she was lost, maybe she'd figure it out. But by the third time, when she blew past me like I was a lamppost and left a splatter of mud up my jeans, I knew what it was: entitlement. See, I don't care what car you drive, what your title is, or how many people call you ma'am at HOA meetings. If you can't respect a simple boundary, you don't belong in someone else's yard, literally or otherwise. You might be wondering why I didn't just call the cops. Well, in my experience, folks like her don't learn from laws. They learn from consequences, real ones, muddy ones. But more on that in a bit. I know this sounds wild already, but trust me, it only gets better. So if you've ever had a neighbor from hell or someone try to walk all over your hard-earned peace, go ahead. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your story, and don't forget to subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this one ends. Now, let me tell you what really pushed me over the edge. It wasn't the SUV. It wasn't even the mud on my boots. It was what she said at that HOA meeting. And that's what we're getting into next. The woman who thought rules were beneath her tires. She didn't knock. She didn't ask. She just drove. Every morning like clockwork, 7:08 a.m. and sharp, you'd hear that engine hum like a wasp with a superiority complex. And then you'd see it, her gleaming white SUV slicing across my land like it had somewhere better to be. Which, ironically, it always did. Her son's private school on the other side of the county. Her name was Karen. Of course it was. She was the self-declared president of the HOA, a title she wore like a tiara, just with sharper edges. I wasn't even part of the HOA, mind you. My land predated the whole development by about 40 years. But that never seemed to stop her from acting like I was one of her peasants. The first time I saw her drive through, I figured she was lost. I even gave a friendly wave. She didn't wave back. Second time, I walked to the end of the driveway, tried to stop her. She stared right past me like I was a lawn ornament. Her tires sprayed mud across my jeans, and she didn't even tap the brakes. The third time, I put up a bigger sign. Partners Road, no through traffic. She drove around it. It wasn't a mistake anymore. It was a message. And it wasn't just me. One neighbor told me she fined him $50.00 for leaving his garbage cans out an hour too long. Another said she once threatened to report their Halloween decorations for being seasonally aggressive, whatever that means. Karen didn't follow rules. She created them for everyone else. And what she couldn't control, she dismissed, ignored, rolled over, literally. I kept hoping she'd stop, hoping she'd get the hint. But then came the HOA meeting. I sat through 40 minutes of people arguing about mailbox heights and flowerbed uniformity just to bring up one simple issue, my road, and her using it like a racetrack. Karen smiled that smug, sideways smile like she was being polite at a charity event. And then she said, I'll never forget it, maybe Sam should be grateful people even want to drive past his little barn. Little barn? No ma'am, that was my home, my land, my life. She didn't just trespass that day, she insulted everything I stood for. And that's when I stopped hoping and started planning. Coming up next, how a trench, a tarp, and a good old-fashioned dose of justice turned entitlement. Stay with me. When the system shrugs, what happens when HOA enables abuse? Now, I'm no lawyer. I'm a retired vet with a bad knee and a decent tractor. But even I know that if someone drives across your property day after day without permission, that's called trespassing. So when Karen kept speeding past every sign, every polite warning, every ounce of decency, I figured maybe, just maybe, the HOA board would step in. Spoiler alert, they didn't. I showed up to another HOA meeting, even though I wasn't part of it, wasn't required, wasn't welcome, and certainly wasn't thanked for my time. I sat in the back of the room with a folder full of timestamps, photos of her tire marks, and a copy of my deed with the property lines clearly highlighted in yellow. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, took a breath, and said plainly, "This road here, it's mine. It's not a community lane, not a shortcut. It's my land. And Karen's SUV has been treating it like the Indy 500. You'd think that would spark outrage, or at least concern. But what I got was silence, then awkward throat clearing. And finally, Karen, smiling like she just won bingo night, saying, well, maybe you should have paved it better if you didn't want people using it. Some of the board members laughed. That's when I realized this wasn't just Karen being Karen. This was an entire system built to protect people like her. Loud, pushy, well-connected, people who didn't follow the rules but made them up as they went. And everyone else? We were background noise, speed bumps. And the worst part? No one wanted to deal with it. They shrugged, like it wasn't their problem, like land, boundaries, and respect were negotiable. But see, I come from a different world. In the military, we respected lines. Chain of command meant something. Out here, land is sacred. You cross a man's fence without asking, you better be bringing pie or a fence post. So when the HOA brushed me off, they didn't just fail me. They gave me permission to defend what was mine. Next part? Let's just say it involves an excavator, a trench, and the most satisfying crunch you've ever heard. Now, on to the trench. Trench warfare, rural style, the power of a lawful boundary. You ever draw a line in the dirt and dare someone to cross it? That's what this was. Only instead of a stick in the sand, I used a 3-ton excavator, 2 permits, and a cup of coffee that went cold before the first scoop of earth was even turned. I called my old army buddy Pete, now a landscaper with a serious backhoe and an even more serious sense of humor. Told him I wanted a trench. Not a little drainage ditch. A trench. Something deep enough to stop a vehicle, but legal enough to pass any county inspection. Just wide enough to teach a lesson, but not wide enough to land me in jail. Pete laughed for a solid 30 seconds, then said, "Sam, I've dug holes to plant trees. I've dug foundations. But this sounds fun." 4 hours after sunset, under the cover of crickets and common sense, we got to work. We measured, checked property lines twice, called the sheriff's office just to make sure. I even brought out the county surveyor's map like I was about to launch a NASA mission. By the time we finished, the trench was perfect. Straight, narrow, masked, just enough to look like plain gravel from a distance. A little tarp. A sprinkle of top-layer rock. No flashing lights. no danger signs. Just the calm quiet of consequence, waiting patiently in the dirt. And then I waited. Next morning, I parked the tractor nearby and sipped my coffee like any other peaceful day. Birds chirped, dew on the grass, and then, wham! That sound, it was beautiful. A luxury SUV nosediving into karma at 25 miles per hour. Metal crunching, tires spinning. A high-pitched scream echoing off the barn walls like she'd discovered gravity for the first time. I walked over, slow, calm, mug in hand. Karen was flailing in the driver's seat, yelling about legal action, about how this wasn't marked, and how dare I. I just raised an eyebrow and said, "Karen, this is private property. You ignored 6 signs. This is called a consequence." She called it entrapment. I called it Monday. But that wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. See, when someone like Karen gets humiliated, they don't just lick their wounds and move on. They escalate, which brings us to what came next. The flyers, the smear campaign, and one sheriff's deputy who showed up with coffee in hand and a grin on his face. Stick around. Part 5 is where things go public, real public. The moment she sank, and so did her reputation. They say pride comes before the fall. In Karen's case, it came in white leather heels, and the fall landed her waist deep in cow manure. I remember it in slow motion. Her SUV nose-looked in the trench, rear wheels spinning hopelessly in the air. She tried to open the driver's door. It was jammed. She screamed, kicked, finally climbed out through the passenger side, planting her pristine heels into soft dirt. Big mistake. Her right heel snapped instantly. Her foot plunged into the mud with a wet slurp, like a boot sucked off in a swamp. The look on her face? Like the moment a prom queen realizes the tiara's plastic. She was yelling, swatting at imaginary flies, one shoe in hand like a weapon. "Help me!" she shrieked. "This is illegal. I'll sue you to oblivion." I took a slow sip of my coffee and nodded toward the 6 Plural Road sign she'd ignored that week. Then, like a scene from a sitcom, the neighbors started showing up. First Pete, chewing on a toothpick and grinning like he was at a drive-in. Then Ron, with his phone out recording. Someone even brought popcorn. Karen didn't just fall in the mud that morning, her reputation did too. Within hours, a video clip titled "The Trench Awakens" went viral on the neighborhood Facebook group, set to dramatic opera music, featuring slow-mo of her slipping, falling, flailing like a confused bird in a wind tunnel. Popcorn emojis, laugh reacts, comments like, "This is better than Netflix." "She fined me for my wind chimes." "Karma's real." "Sam for mayor." Karen tried to fight back. Posted a 3-paragraph essay claiming I'd booby-trapped the road, but the footage showed otherwise. Signs, permits, property lines, all in my favor. She wasn't the hero in this story. She was the cautionary tale, and like any good drama, it was only a matter of time before the legal letters started flying. Because when the mud settles, the lawsuits start brewing. Which brings us to the next chapter. The sheriff, the smear campaign, and the moment she tried to turn the whole neighborhood against me. Let's talk about that in part 6, smear tactics and sheriff visits, holding the line with the law. Community unmasked, when one trench reveals a village's true face. At first, I thought I was fighting this alone. Just me, my land, and a stubborn trench that had become both line in the sand and punchline of the month. But when the dust and the mud started settling, something unexpected happened. People started showing up, not with pitchforks but with stories. Ron, from 2 blocks over, Karen fined him $75, 0 cents for a garden gnome, said it disrupted the visual harmony of the cul-de-sac. Marie, the retired schoolteacher, she got written up for Halloween decorations, put up on October 1st. And then there was Miguel, the nicest guy you'll ever meet. He got a notice because his recycling bin was visible for 22 minutes after pickup. Turns out I wasn't the first to feel Karen's HOA wrath. Just the first to dig a trench about it. In that trench, it became a mirror. People stopped being afraid. They started waving again. Talking. Laughing. At the next HOA meeting, which I didn't attend by the way, neighbors came with screenshots, emails, even a spreadsheet of Karen's, quote, creative interpretations of the rule book. Marie stood up, calm and sweet, and asked, "Show of hands, who here actually voted for any of these rules?" Crickets. Then murmurs. Then someone blurted, "Wait, Karen can't do that alone, right?" Turns out, she had. Emergency powers she never officially had. Fines no one remembered approving. And budgets? Well, let's just say receipts were conveniently missing. The final straw? Karen had submitted a complaint to the state level, accusing me of endangering children and creating a battlefield. Deputy Harris, bless his soul, stopped by off-duty with the county's final report in hand. No violation, no hazard, property rights affirmed. He smiled and said, "Sam, I think your trench did more than stop a car. I think it cracked something open." And it had. The next week, Karen's house had a big "for sale" sign out front. The same lawn she once judged others for? Now her own billboard of defeat. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about relief. You could feel it in the air. Neighbors started hanging out again. Barbecues popped up. Lawn chairs returned to front porches like butterflies after a storm. And then came the cookout. The night that proved once and for all, the trench wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to all of us. Which leads perfectly into what happened next. Part 7, the cookout, the cardboard SUV, and the unexpected letter. When laughter, lemonade, and one strange apology sealed the end of the war. Letters, lies, and legal lines when HOA crumbles from within. You'd think that after the trench, the screaming, and the SUV debacle, Karen might have taken the hint. She didn't. Nope. Just a week after her luxury tank got towed out of my pasture, smelling like compost and defeat, she doubled down. This time, she went full paper warfare. I came home to find a shiny envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, just the HOA logo up top in bold, like it was auditioning for a courtroom drama. Inside was a letter that read like it had been written by a lawyer with a thesaurus and a personal grudge. "You have created an imminent hazard. You are in violation of community safety codes. You will be held liable for all resulting damages." It was signed Karen L. Wellington, President, Acting Chair of Legal Oversight Committee, which I'm fairly certain she made up on the spot. The woman practically invented job titles the way some folks collect bottle caps. But what she didn't realize? She had no authority. See, I'm not under HOA jurisdiction. Never paid dues, never signed a covenant, never agreed to their nonsense. So I scanned the letter, added it to my growing evidence folder, right between Dead Chicken Photo Exhibit A and Security Footage Compilation Volume 2, and emailed it to the county office. That same evening, guess who pulled into my driveway? Deputy Harris. Only this time, he was in jeans, off duty, holding a coffee and shaking his head. "She filed another complaint, Sam. Said your trench was malicious intent to cause emotional harm via topographical manipulation." I nearly choked on my laugh. I asked him if that was even a real phrase. He said, "Nope, but it's going to be my fantasy football team name." He reviewed everything, again. The permits, the signs, the drone footage, even the timeline I'd printed with color-coded highlights. After 20 minutes, he looked at me and said, "Karen's not just losing this battle, Sam. She's losing her grip." And it wasn't just legal. Turns out, while she was busy flinging legal threats like confetti at a courtroom circus, the HOA board itself had started to crack. Born and proud gnome owner gave me the play-by-play, and by play. At the next meeting, someone finally asked the question that broke it wide open. Who approved the trench complaint? Silence. Turns out no one did. Karen had been making unilateral decisions for months, citing emergency executive power, which, surprise, was never in the bylaws. One woman pulled out her HOA handbook like it was a holy text and waved it like a flag. She found 3 violations Karen herself had committed, just in her front yard. By the end of the night, a motion to suspend her presidency was filed and passed. Karen didn't even stay for the vote. She stormed out, threw the HOA banner on the floor, and peeled out of the parking lot like she was starring in a midlife crisis action movie. And then, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn like a silent white flag. I didn't cheer, I didn't throw a party, but I did sit out on my porch that night with a whiskey and a grin. Because sometimes, justice doesn't bang a gavel, it just folds quietly into a manila envelope and walks itself off your land. And that brings us to the unexpected epilogue. Part 8. From trench to trust. The peace you have to dig for. When the dust clears, and the land, and its people, learn how to breathe again. No more shortcuts. Why this trench changed more than a road. The trench is gone now. What's left is a subtle rise in the gravel, 2 new posts with clean signage, and a memory etched deeper than any ditch ever dug. Karen moved out a month ago. Her house sits a little quieter these days. New owners, young couple with 2 kids and a dog that somehow manages to bark in complete sentences. They brought over cookies their first week and asked if the trench story was true. I said only the muddy parts. They laughed, but I could see it in their eyes. They appreciated the quiet, the boundaries, the space to just be without someone breathing down their neck about hedge high. And as for me, I still wake up before sunrise, pour my coffee, check the trail cams, and walk the fence line. Only now the air feels different, lighter, like the land itself finally took a deep breath after holding it in for too long. That trench wasn't revenge. It wasn't even just a warning. It was a mirror, one that forced the whole neighborhood to take a good hard look at how far we'd let control dress up as order, and how quickly dignity gets flattened when no one stands up. Funny how a 4-foot hole in the ground could spark so much change. We started talking to each other more, helping each other more. Folks who'd never waved started showing up at community barbecues, bringing potato salad and bad jokes like they'd been doing it for years. Even Pete's landscaping business picked up. Folks kept asking for Karen-proof fencing. He printed that on his van. The best part? No more shortcuts. Not just on the road, but in how we treat one another. No more pretending the HOA president is always right just because she wears a blazer and barks like a traffic cop. No more pretending that someone trespassing isn't a big deal. No more staying silent when something clearly crosses the line. That trench drew a literal and emotional boundary. And in doing so, it reminded us that peace, real peace, doesn't come from pretending everything's fine. It comes from protecting the simple truths. That your land is yours, your voice matters, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand still while everyone else is trying to run you over. So yeah, I didn't set out to be the trench guy, but if that's how folks remember me, an old vet with a tractor, a backbone, and a very muddy message, well, I can live with that. And if you've ever been pushed too far, if someone's been stomping across your lines like they were never drawn at all, just know this: you don't need to yell. You don't need to fight dirty. You just need to dig deep. And make sure when you do, you plant something stronger in the space you defend. Like respect and a road that finally ends where you say it does.